Hey everyone, let's give folks a couple more minutes to join and then we'll get started. Sean, I know I said this in the last workshop, but man, we need to work on our music game for
I
these.
know, we really do. Yeah, it's a little quiet here. We got to have some sort of pump up, like workout playlist going to get people in the mood, you know?
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
exciting.
I'm excited. Yeah.
Oh, I am too. I am too.
All right. Well, let's go and get started. It's 2 minutes after the hour. Welcome everybody, whether it's good afternoon, good evening, good morning. We have folks from all over the world. It's good to see that. Today, as you know, when you registered, we're going to do a hands-on intro to CDPs. We're going to talk about CDPs, the business purpose behind it, what it can do for businesses, and then deep dive into actually showing how a CDP works firsthand with our product. So, in our sample apps. So I'm really excited to get us going. Before we do though, here's some housekeeping. We ask that you have a solid internet connection. We'll be showing a lot of things, and you might even want to follow along in GitHub and whatnot. So we ask that you have that. Everyone is muted when they come on. So if you have the opportunity to unmute yourself, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you want to ask questions. You can also use our chat to ask questions. Zoom has these reaction stuff, so you can grab our attention with that as well. But we want this to be interactive. So please feel free to chime in. This is very informal in the sense that we want to make it more of a workshop and not a webinar. So please do chime in and ask away. And we're recording this session, so you don't have to sit there and take notes. You can just watch, and then we'll share out the recording shortly after the workshop. All right, with the boring stuff out of the way, let's give you a little overview. There's two major sections. One, we'll go over the introduction, what is a challenge, how CDPs can help, and then we'll have fun with the live workshop where we'll install a web app, we'll connect the sample app with mParticle, see how the instrumentation actually works in the code. You don't have to be technical. It's for edification. You'll actually see in the code base how instrumentation works, and then see how that translates in the UI, and then be able to actually see a full end-to-end integration with events being forwarded to our webhook. All right, so today we've got Sean, my partner in crime. He's on the technical writing team. I'm Shafiq Shivji, and I'm on the product marketing team. We've been doing this for about a year now, so very excited to continue. And with that, let's get started. So here's a brief introduction to CDPs. I'm a product marketer, so I'm going to do a short narrative about a fictitious company called mCorp. It's a mid-sized enterprise that sells clothing on an e-commerce site. So let's meet Jake. Jake is a senior growth marketer for mCorp. Jake is responsible for crafting data-driven marketing strategies and quickly iterating on tactics to attract, win, and retain customers. Customer data is absolutely crucial for Jake to do his job. He needs to have a deep understanding about who his customers are and what they like, so he can put together and deliver targeted marketing campaigns, ideally in real time, that drive sales. Jake learns about a new designer clothing line about to launch and conjures up the ideal customer profile for this campaign. He works with his favorite copywriter to create messaging and retargeting campaigns to garner interest. And now all he needs is data about his target audience. He thinks it can't be that hard to get the data. So he slacks mCorp's data PM, Rachel. Hey, Rach, could you pull a list of customers that meet these criteria? By the way, I need it in the next day or two. Thanks. Rachel sees Jake's message and thinks, wait, what customer data? Why does Jake need this in 2 days? That's going to be really hard to do. She responds by asking Jake to explain. And after a short exchange, Rachel says, let me see what I can do. Unfortunately, I can tell you now, we won't be able to hit a 2-day SLA. Let me run this by the data team and get back to you. Uh-oh, Jake is in a bind. As promised, Rachel reviews Jake's request with mParticle's data team, Susie, a data engineer, and Paul, an application developer. Rachel's first task is to scope out the work, so she asks Susie if they have the data they need to build out Jake's audience. Susie says she can get a lot of the data, but that it's spread across multiple tables in the data warehouse. I will have to write and execute a bunch of SQL statements to collect and union the data. But to be honest, I'm not sure how accurate and up-to-date the tables are. Paul chimes in and says that he can write the code to track the additional events that are missing. But since the app and website can't retroactively collect data, they won't have it for the current campaign. And as for timing, Susie said she'll have to wait for the current 2-week sprint to finish to be able to schedule the work in. And Paul will have to wait for the next product release. On top of that, there's this code freeze that is in place. So he doesn't even know when the new events will start to be tracked. Rachel's not looking forward to having to tell Jake that he'll have to wait at least 2 to 3 weeks to get the data he needs. Susie, being the rock star that she is, gets Jake a CSV file in less than 2 weeks. However, it's still missing the new data event because of the code freeze. It didn't lift in time. Not great, but Jake will have to just make do with what he has. The new clothing line already launched and he's missing a window of opportunity. Jake takes the CSV file and then manually loads it into the separate marketing tools mCorp uses to reach its target audiences. That was a lot of work and a painful process. Jake has more campaign ideas he wants to test, not to mention new marketing tools he wants to try out, but he doesn't want to go through the same experience over and over again. Ideally, there would be a way he could build custom audiences and customer journeys on his own and have the ability to experiment with new MarTech tools. In their monthly retro, Susie and Paul tell Rachel it is very difficult for them to fulfill these one-off requests from marketing. It's too distracting and takes away from the work they're directly accountable for. The team knows that they need to break this cycle with the better solution to serve their stakeholders. So let's put this example into context of what pretty much all modern businesses or any businesses universally face today. Data is everywhere. We all were told, collect the data, it's the new gold. But to create the experiences that customers expect, like Jake's clothing line campaign, businesses need to have a scalable mechanism in order to capture the data across the vast array of sources. And once that data is coming in from all these disparate sources, it creates data chaos or complexity, both in terms of where the data is stored and the volume of data that's created. Accessing and enabling customer data without underlying infrastructure requires a high degree of technical expertise, skills that elude most marketing and product teams. Also, to deliver the modern, personalized experiences that customers expect, businesses need to collect and process bespoke user profile data. The more complete a customer profile, the more personalized the experience can be. So how can CDPs help? Well, first of all, customer data infrastructure allows modern businesses to capture data from any source in any form, typically with just a few lines of code. Once instrumented by a developer, data flows into the CDP where data engineers, PMs, and marketers can collaborate using simple user interfaces to control which data is sent where. Also, real-time data feeds ensure that customer profiles are always up to date, which translates to higher conversion rates, better customer experiences, and actionable insights. All right, here are a few more challenges. Piping data and resolving identities are not the only challenges that customers face. Businesses need to ensure that the data delivered to the downstream destinations is high quality. We've all heard of the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. It's actually very easy to break data models, and then you get a ton of bad data going to multiple locations. Customers also expect brands to deliver that one-on-one personal experience. Think of product recs on Amazon, suggested media content on Netflix, or personalized in-app messaging. These experiences are only possible with real-time data. Also, we must respect consumer privacy, not only because of regulations like GDPR and CCPA, but in order to foster trust with customers, foster trust in your brand. New data sources and challenges to existing channels causes this constant data chaos. Teams have to be able to adapt to these changes. And finally, scalability and availability are critical for any digital business. We all know that downtime hurts the bottom line. So that's the business side of the house. But for those of you who are more technically inclined, I want to illustrate how CDPs simplify data collection across your stack. Just take this example. Say you build a native app for web, iOS, and Android, and you want to instrument them with 3 destinations plus your data warehouse. It's a very simple use case. Most companies have much more robust infrastructures, but I just want to illustrate a point. So first, what you do, you instrument your analytics tool, then your social media tools, your messaging tools, and finally your data warehouse. But you're going to need to collect the data from the tools that you're using, such as insights, impressions, any open rates, those type of things, for example. Data collection becomes this tangled web very fast. And without a CDP, you're going to have to maintain those integrations for those multiple tools, which becomes a redundant and really a low value task for an engineer. SDK bloat results in degraded app performance. Think about you have an app in the App Store. Well, if you have more code, it's going to take longer to download. Every time an event triggers, it's going to have to go through more, it's going to have to fire more processes. And so your performance of the app will go down. And when a new tool is introduced, your developers are going to have to build and maintain those new integrations. So if something changes in a downstream app, say Braze updates its SDK, and your growth marketer wants to utilize that new capability, well, you got to go back, update your app, and go through the whole product release and QA cycle. Also, it's hard to attribute data to profiles correctly because users shift from anonymous visitors to identified users, as you'll see in our sample apps. And this has to work across platforms, whether you're on the website or your mobile app or whatever, or in store. With the CDP, you can establish one version of the data from the point of origin across each tool, so you can avoid having duplicate events and attribution. You can avoid low value engineering workloads and having to manage multiple SDKs and duplicate data capture. You can improve the speed to market and time to value of new tools and product capabilities. The MarTech landscape is changing so fast. Just 10 years ago, it was in 3 digits, 4 digits. Now it's in the 5 digits, and over 10,000 applications are now in that stack. You can also leverage fully baked productized server integrations to ensure data consistency everywhere. We call these data feeds. So you can take, for example, the outcome of an email campaign, feed it back into mParticle, and do all sorts of cool things with that. You can also enable non-technical users to be able to query the data and build custom audiences. How many marketers know SQL? Hand goes down. All right, now that we've kind of set the context at a high level for a CDP, let's segue into the actual workshop, because I'm sure this is why you came to see us today. So I'm going to hand it over to my partner in crime, Sean, to deep dive into the workshop.
Sure thing. Thank you very much for that intro, Shafiq. Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Ryan. I am a technical writer on the content team. here at mParticle, and I work very closely with Shafiq and the product team as well. And a big part of what I do is to help bring mParticle's products to life, particularly for the technical audience and folks who are going to be having their hands on the code and implementing our SDK and event collection, and basically doing all of the things that Shafiq was just talking about in his introduction there. So today we're going to talk about a couple things, and the biggest thing that I'm going to kind of go through and show you all on this call is the sample applications that we just created and rolled out. And these are fully functional web, iOS, and Android projects that have our SDK implemented to collect data across the user journey. These are e-commerce apps. So they're using our e-commerce part of our SDK that gives developers kind of bespoke, repeatable ways to capture, common data events that you would want to see and keep track of as your customers are moving through the kinds of flows that you would have in an e-commerce environment. And in addition to that, we're also going to look at, kind of side by side with looking at the sample apps. We're going to look at the onboarding tutorial that we have in the mParticle UI, which uses the sample app as an input for data to show a complete flow from an input to an output. But it's also just a great way for anybody who's going to be using the mParticle platform, whether that's a technical user or a marketer or a PM, to just become acquainted with how it works, how data flows through mParticle, and some of the kind of core basic concepts that you'll need to become proficient with mParticle, and really kind of shorten that on-ramp and the time to value to your data. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can actually illustrate some of the things that I'm talking about here. So this is the onboarding tutorial at the very beginning of it, which we'll start going through once we have the sample app sort of up and running. And the sample app it lives right here. This is the web version of the app. And as I mentioned, there are iOS and Android versions of it as well. So before we, the first step we're going to take here is to kind of go through the process of cloning this, running it locally, and getting it set up as a local project in our development environment. So I'm in GitHub here. If there are any kind of developers or technical users on this call, this is probably something that you're very familiar with seeing. I'm cloning the repository right now, grabbing the URL to do that. I'm just going to open a terminal at the folder where I'm going to clone my project. And now I'm actually going to clone the project. It shouldn't take too long. It's always a toss-up to see how long these processes are going to take. Sometimes they're very quick, sometimes you hit a little bit of a snag, but seems to be moving along. All right, and there we go. So it looks like all of the folders have built locally, and I'm going to open this in Visual Studio Code, which is my IDE of choice. And now that I am here in VS Code, I'm going to go ahead and open up the terminal in my IDE. And the first thing I'll do is actually CD down into the sample app directory. And I'm going to check the version of Node that I'm on just to make sure that I'm going to be able to install my packages. So I'm on 15.4.0, and I will upgrade that with NVM. Use LTS, which has brought me all the way up to version 16.4.0. So now I'm in the directory where I can actually run commands against the package JSON in the project, and I'm going to run npm install, which will install all of the Node packages that I'm going to need locally. This is a React project, by the way. We use React to create this sample app, basically because it's a very popular framework. It's very commonly used, to build e-commerce applications, and we wanted to kind of meet developers where they are and show them working code and the environments that they're familiar with and that they work in, in their own projects. So that's the thinking behind that. We'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along. Okay, so all of my, looks like all my node packages have built locally. So I'm going to go back over to the onboarding tutorial and move through this. I move through the steps that we've sort of already done by cloning the repo. I will indicate that I have indeed cloned the repo. So now the part of this that we've arrived at is setting up an input. And really, what an input is any source from which you can send data to mParticle. And that can be anything, in this case, we're going to be using an e-commerce web application, but that could be a mobile app. It could be a backend system. Behind this modal here, you can kind of see examples of all of the sources from which you can collect and send data to mParticle, OTT, server to server setups. So we'll move forward. And this is the part of the mParticle UI where you can create new inputs. So being that this is a web application, we're going to select a web input. And this step here is going to generate our API key for us, which sometimes takes a few seconds, other times happens relatively quickly. Seems like this time it's taking a few seconds. Then it's always a little bit of a toss up to see where we might hit some delays, but that's okay because we're all here together and having a good time.
Well, we could always, I think it's lunchtime for somebody.
You could.
They're looking for the keys where they are.
Right. I hate when I forget my keys.
That's funny. Well, the good thing is that it indicates that this is a real live demo and workshop, not a canned one.
Yeah,
So.
Absolutely. I think that there's an old saying in show business that you should never work with kids or animals. They should add live code to that.
I think it's authentic. One trick that I do sometimes that works is hard reset, but that
Hard
might
reset.
Oh, you didn't have to do it.
There we go. Didn't even have to do the hard reset. All right, so this is our API key that mParticle has generated for us for our web app. And we are not going to need the secret. The key is all we will be needing. So we'll go back over to our project in VS Code, and our environment variable file is where we're going to be adding our API key. And the first thing I'll do is actually rename .env.test to just .env. And I'm going to replace the placeholder here with our actual real live genuine API key. So now that I have done that, I'm ready to actually run this project locally. So I'm going to run the command npm start. And again, this is part of the process that sometimes takes a little while, sometimes happens rather quickly. And what this is doing is actually setting up a server locally on my machine on localhost. For those of you who are familiar with this process, who do this every day, I apologize for boring you, but I think there are definitely some folks who are less familiar with it. This is this is setting up an environment on my machine where I can run this code and run this project, and I don't have to deploy it elsewhere out on the web. I can just play with it on my computer here. So starting the dev server does take a moment. I will give it a second, and we do have a fallback if this takes a little longer than we're expecting it to.
Sean, I keep telling you, you gotta put in a requisition for more memory, more RAM.
Every time you tell me that, none of the times.
Just send them this video, and then you'll definitely get your upgrade.
I know. I'll expedite the IT ticket and it'll come through once we showed them how much we had to, how much time we had to kill. That's, but I mean, in the meantime, I could kind of just go back here and show a little bit more about
But
the
do you
onboarding
want to, do you want
tutorial.
to, maybe for the less technical folks, you can explain, what Node's doing in the background?
Sure. Yeah. So, in the,
Don't need to.
well, maybe we won't need to do that.
You know what it is?
Um,
I just need to say it faster, because I make the recommendation and then the computer goes, no, thank you.
That's usually what happens. Yeah, it's like, nah, we don't want to hear that. Let's just get to business, so we don't have to go through that. Okay, so this is the sample app actually up and running on my computer, and it's called Higgsmart. Higgs is our wonderful our mascot, who is a capybara, and this is like a fictional e-commerce website that's going to allow us to buy a lot of Higgs swag and gear, and this is kind of set up like, kind of like your basic e-commerce UI that you could, you can imagine like a real, clothing line having something looking like this. React is kind of a very common framework to use for building e-commerce interfaces like this because it is component based, and we'll kind of show you, how we're using that to send the mParticle events a little bit later on. But as I'm going through this and as I'm performing different events, and by that I mean just taking action within the interface. The events that are being sent are actually the data that's being captured and sent along to mParticle, which if we go back to our UI and move sort of one step farther in the onboarding flow here, we're going to go to the live stream, which is, this is kind of like, I call it central command for the mParticle interface. And it's really like, this is the part of our platform that shows you your customer events coming in real time. And if you see behind this modal here, all of these separate rows in here are different events. And these all correspond to different actions that I was just taking when I was navigating through Higgsmart just now and continuing to do. So when I do things like, add some customization to a product that I'm looking at, add a product to my cart, go back to the home page, open up another product page, all of these things are being captured as events in the code that is making this e-commerce app run. And we're sending that to mParticle. And these are the things that we can see here. For instance, this commerce event is, this is us looking at the view detail page for the unisex full logo tee that we just looked at. And this, there's a lot of things that marketers and PMs and anybody who is responsible for data or leverages data in their job can do at this part of the interface. This allows you to QA incoming data events as they're being performed. Behind the scenes here, this is like a little bit beyond the scope of what we're going to be kind of mainly focusing on, but we created a data plan, which is basically the main source of truth for all of the data events that we're collecting throughout this application. And as these events are coming in, mParticle is checking the structure and the content of the events against that data plan. And if it notices inconsistencies, which it isn't right now, it would let you know that by surfacing errors right here. So this is something that makes it really easy to kind of spot bad data before it makes its way down into your downstream systems later on. So at this point, so what we've done so far, which I realize is kind of a lot, is we set up an input in mParticle, which is Higgsmart, and we connected that input to our mParticle workspace here. We sent a few test events through to mParticle, and that's what we're looking at right now. So that's kind of the stage of the game where we are. And now we're going to move forward to set up an output. And as you might be able to guess, an output is a destination. for events that you can collect with mParticle. And these, in sort of more exciting examples than the one we're going to show you today, these can be things like indicative or mixed panel. These are the downstream tools that your marketers and your PMs are going to use to understand customer journeys, activate personalization campaigns, and perform analysis and anything that you can imagine. mParticle has direct integrations with a very wide variety of best in breed tools for all of these different activities. But right now, for the purpose of just showing you, a data connection from input to output, we are going to use a webhook as the sample that we'll work with. So that's the step we're taking right now. We're gonna open up this dropdown, which will show you all the different types of outputs that you can work with. We'll search for webhook and open that right here. We're gonna use a tool called webhook.site, which really, this is just a way of generating like a test webhook that you can use, for a variety of purposes. We're going to copy the URL to our clipboard, come back over to mParticle, and before I do that, I need to name it. I'm going to give it the name Web Sample App. And I'm going to paste the URL that I just copied into this bar right here. Go ahead and click Save. And there we go. We've set up our first output. Now, the last step that we're going to take is to create a connection between the input and the output. And in the mParticle world, the connections are sort of like the glue between the sources from which you're collecting data and the places that you're sending them along to. And it's sort of like this, this pipe, if you can imagine that. It's not just a way of forwarding the data, in kind of like a unintelligent, dumb way. It's giving you a way to kind of also tell mParticle what you want to happen with that data along the journey. So there are lots of different configurations you can set with your connections between inputs and outputs, and we won't get into all of that today. But this screen here is where we would do that if we were going to kind of be a little bit more specific about how we wanted the data to travel from point A to point B. But all we're going to do in this example is say that we want this to be active. And we're going to uncheck event batching, which for our purposes will help us get the data through a little bit quicker. We'll click Add Connection. And it can take a little while to apply the changes, but okay. So now the connection is active, but it can take a bit of time to actually set up and for us to see the data flowing, from our input all the way down to our output. So in the meantime, I'm going to go and dive in a little bit to our actual sample app and talk a little bit about what this is and why we built this and who it's for, and show you some, kind of actually code examples that, hopefully will create some aha moments for you all. So as I was mentioning earlier, these sample apps really are, this is a way for us to provide developers who use mParticle with like a living, breathing source of documentation that allows them to see an implementation in a working environment. It's one thing to have docs at your disposal that kind of give you the blueprint for how you're supposed to use an API or how you're supposed to install a system into your own project. But it's kind of another thing altogether to have that shown to you in the environment that you're going to be working in, and have like a really robust, completed implementation of, in this case, event collection code that in many cases, developers will probably be able to just literally copy paste into their own projects. And then once it's in there, that will probably get them 90% of the way to the goalpost, and then they'll just have to make some sort of fine adjustments from there with the docs. But the idea here is that when there's kind of another pain point on the technical side of integrating these systems that we didn't really address too directly earlier. But when developers are handed a new system to integrate into their existing projects, say a PM comes over and says, we want to get this analytics partner tied into our iOS app. How quickly can you do that? They have a pretty big task ahead of them, because sometimes third-party APIs can sort of be like a bit of a black box, and the mental model that the developers who built that system are using doesn't always necessarily align with the one that you have in your own projects, in your own environment. So you have to do a little bit of kind of mental juggling. You have to figure out how you're going to take your schema and your way of collecting data and kind of map it into this new this new system where you need your data to flow into. And that can take a lot of time. That could be frustrating, could take a lot of trial and error. So that's what we were addressing here. We really want developers to be able to avoid that situation when they're using mParticle, and we want them to have as quick of an on-ramp as possible to getting their implementation up and running, and for the folks who are actually going to be kind of leveraging that data to get value out of the data that's at their disposal. So that's kind of the background on what this is and why we built it. Let me now dive into some of the actual code. And one of the components that I always like to highlight when I look at this is the product detail page, because being that this is an e-commerce application, this is really kind of like an important part of the user journey for us to get data from, right? I mean, this is where the user is looking at the products, and this is also where we can capture a lot of information about the products that our users are viewing, adding to their carts, customizing, and things like that. So as I said, this is a React application, and anybody who writes React code regularly will be familiar with everything we're looking at here, all these import statements, and the way that this component is set up. You can see here we're importing mParticle as a node package. So that's actually the way that we're bringing the mParticle SDK into our environment, and this is actually what lets us call various methods on the mParticle web SDK that we're going to be using to collect data. So down here, the first thing that I would like to take a look at is the view detail event. So as I said, this is the page where the user is looking at a product, right? And this method right here, create product, which is on the mParticle e-commerce API, which is part of our web SDK that's specific to e-commerce applications. And I'll take a quick step back to kind of explain what that means. Our customers use mParticle for a variety of purposes, and there are a lot of different environments and types of projects that developers have to, in which developers have to install event collection. And for common ones like e-commerce, we want to give developers kind of a repeatable, easy, and kind of like purpose-built way to collect and package the data that they want to capture and send it along to mParticle. Not only does that prevent inconsistencies and potential data errors, but when you have kind of like a repeatable way that data is coming into the system, it makes it much easier to then map that to the APIs and the downstream systems where that data is going to be flowing to. So here, we're invoking the mParticle object that we're importing into this component here. We are calling the e-commerce API, and then on that API, we're using the create product method. And VS Code gives us this way of seeing all of the different arguments that this takes, and these are things that are that we would be interested in when we want to capture data that pertains to a user arriving at a product page, right? So we can grab the product name, the SKU, the price, the quantity, And this gives us like a very kind of structured, systematized way to get all that information. So once we have created our product, and that's kind of packaged up neatly, down here, a little bit farther down in this component, we're actually going to call this event called log product action, which is another method on the e-commerce API that mParticle gives us. And this is actually what we're going to be using to take all of that data and forward it along to mParticle. And the way that we are triggering this event call is by the use effect hook. And again, if anybody is familiar with React, use effect is a very common hook that fires when a component renders in the user interface, which is that's a really great way to that's a great way that you can fire off events, and a great trigger that you can use to send data to mParticle, because it corresponds to when a user's landing on a page where we'd want to kind of understand what they're doing. But you can use any other kind of convention that the environment, the program environment that you're working with is giving you. There are plenty of other examples throughout the sample app where we're using things like event listeners, click listeners, to do the same thing that we're doing here. But basically, all this is to say that if you had a similar e-commerce or e-commerce application on the web that you wanted to implement event collection on, this would be very close to what you would want to use, right? To what you would want to capture and include in your own projects. Another thing that you might be noticing is that this is like really heavily commented code. And there's a reason for that. Remember earlier how I was kind of saying that these sample applications are a way for us to give developers kind of a form of documentation that they can get their hands on. And that's kind of where all of this really detailed commenting comes in. We want to use this as an opportunity to not just say here's the code and that's that, but to provide a lot of context and kind of information about the best practices that we're implementing here, and show developers why we're doing what we're doing, why we're using the particular conventions that we are to collect and capture data and send it to mParticle. And we're looking at these sample apps as something that we're going to continue to maintain going forward. So when we make changes to our SDK, or we add new methods to our SDK, we're going to update this. We're going to keep this current and always reflective of the current state of our SDKs on all of the platforms where we have these sample apps. So that gives probably a bit of an idea of what developers can expect when they open this up and start to use this as hopefully a catalyst for getting their event collection set up. So let's go back to our sample app now, and it's possible that we've had enough time to get our output, or excuse me, our outbound destination set up and the flow of data completed, but it's also possible that has not yet happened. So I'll just fire off a few more test events to see what's going on before we go back over into the mParticle UI. That's a really cool water bottle there. Kind of want to buy some of this stuff.
Why don't you start an mParticle coin, and we can we can buy stuff with that.
So maybe I don't want all these things in my cart. I'll remove some of them. Right. So back here in live stream, we are seeing the new events that we've fired off. But if we just want to examine the ones that are going out to the actual webhook that we know is working, we would filter this by events that are being sent to an outbound destination. And at the moment, those events are not yet available for us to examine because it hasn't been a ton of time. It does take a little while for that connection to get set up. But I think this is probably a good juncture where we can just hit pause for a second. And do we have, has anybody asked any questions in the chat at this point, or?
No, we're good to keep going.
No, good to keep going. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and eventually I'll probably have to just flip back over to a setup that we already have instrumented to show you the flow of data. But as I was saying earlier, we're capturing a lot of data throughout the entire user journey on these sample apps and in the e-commerce implementation that we have set up. And you can imagine like all of the different use cases that enables for marketers and for PMs to have kind of like a really granular look at what customers are doing as they're moving through different journeys and different flows in your project, in your application. For instance, if you have a situation where you're capturing like cart abandonment, then you would be able to send, you can capture that in real time. You can forward that down to an engagement partner, like a Braze or something like that. And you can send a notification to a user who has added something to their cart, and you can say, hey, you forgot to check out. Do you still want to buy that t-shirt that you added to your cart and then abandoned? And in that case, you can catch people that maybe legitimately just closed their browser. They didn't get to complete their order, before they checked out. I mean, there are many, many other ways in which you can activate that data. And mParticle allows, one of the biggest benefits of having event collection set up and collecting, all of this information from all of your various sources is that your marketers and your PMs don't need to rely on your developers, right? To make new audiences and to do things that in sort of another stack, in another scenario, they would probably need to have some technical support with, right? You can imagine to get an audience that's kind of specific for a use case. In a lot of cases, a marketer would have to go to a data engineer and say, we're looking to activate data for X purpose, and we're looking for customers who have made a purchase in the last 2 weeks and have spent over X amount of dollars. That could potentially be a pretty significant workflow for those data engineers. So in this case, it's all of that is kind of done within a UI. I mean, we have several we have audience building and a lot of different features and products that allow marketers to kind of just handle all of those flows themselves without needing to enlist engineers, and the engineers can kind of continue doing their thing and use their time in the way that kind of benefits the business.
Wait,
most
Sean.
impactfully.
Engineers didn't sign up to be developers to instrument SDKs and or integrate SDKs and instrument apps. Wait,
I don't think most of them do. I don't think most of them do. Not based on what I've heard. I think they like to build features and like ship production code and do stuff like that. I don't know.
Innovative stuff. Really?
Yeah.
I really like how you talk about that a lot in your blogs, your blog posts. If you haven't read them, Sean, you should look up Sean on our blog. He's I like his style. It's very comical. His intros are very comical. I always chuckle when I read them.
Thank you, Shafiq. I aim to inform and entertain. Okay, so I'm just going to switch over to a separate workspace over here in mParticle that we have connected to, an outbound destination with our data flow here. So here we are back on the ranch, and I'm going to go into Data Master and take a look at live stream. And here, if we filter by our outbound events, we can see that we have quite a few events that are being sent off, over into our webhook. And we actually can see those events being received in our webhook as well. So that's what that looks like on the back end. That's kind of the outbound side of the whole data flow. And yeah, that's so within this kind of very relatively short space of time, we were able to set up an input for our data, get that data into mParticles, set up a connection between that input and an output, and then finally see that data flowing to our destination. And the fun doesn't stop there. Obviously, there are many more things that we could potentially be doing with this data that we're collecting. I mean, a webhook is one thing, but connecting this to an engagement partner, an analytics partner, and any other tool or platform that you can use to get the most out of your data is really, that's where the value comes out of using mParticle.
That's awesome. And this is the webhook is for illustrative purposes mostly. I mean, I'm sure if you have custom connections, but we have over 300 integration partners listings in our directory. So I'm sure that we most likely have what you're looking for already integrated, and it's a matter of just dropping in your API key for the end destination and getting it set up that way. So, but on the developer side, one thing we didn't talk about is our profile API. You can actually access this event data and profile data in your apps, do all sorts of cool personalization things. Marketers can have build custom audiences, and we just launched our journey building tools. And so there's a lot of cool things that once this is instrumented and set up that you can do.
Absolutely. So I just want to give a quick demo here of this. This is the workspace that we have set up that is actually firing events through the whole flow of data in real time. So we're now sorting our data by everything that is headed in an outbound direction. And when we go, just open this in a separate side-by-side window to show you. So now when we kind of navigate through this, you can see as soon as we create or perform events in our e-commerce app, those events are coming into mParticle. And as soon as they're coming into mParticle, they are headed downstream to the webhook that we have set up to finally collect all this data. And there it is. And we can see them popping in as we speak.
Very cool. All right, well, that kind of brings us to the end of the workshop part. If there's any questions, feel free to ask them now, or you can ask them, you can reach out to us. There'll be a follow-up email with the recording of this webinar, with this workshop. One thing I do want to point out is if you want to do this on your own, we have a couple of options. One, you can sign up for a free trial on our website and go that route. If you and there's a little bit of process to do that. If you just want to try it out, we can give you a demo account to try it out for the workshop purposes. And you can go to the GitHub repo that we have to download the sample app and install a local machine. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. We actually have hosted apps. You can see that Sean actually is using one right now. And so we can host the app for you, and you can just play around with it without having to do any of the developer fun stuff. So look out for that email and let us know if you want to. If you want that a demo account, and if you want us to host a sample app for you. But really, thank you again. Oh, sorry, Sean.
Oh no, I was just nodding along in agreement.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time out to learn more about CDPs in general, and specifically how mParticle works behind the scenes. And with that, we enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you all again at some point in the future.
Thanks
Take
a lot,
care.
everybody.